of Social and Political Psychology, and with a particular focus on topics like political activism, psychological resistance, collective action, and mobilization. Currently, as part of her PhD project, she is actively engaged in studying digital activism and online action among Dalit population. Joshua, I know as somebody who has published in the Collective Resistance series previously, and he is an incoming assistant professor with the Department of Psychology at the Ateneo de Manila University, where he is co-director of the Political Psychology and Democratization Laboratory. He recently obtained his PhD in societal commuting for Carnegie Mellon University, where his work examined the narratives and network dynamics of online hate. His research interests span the intersections of politics and technology, especially in global South democracies, as well as critical approaches to computational social science more broadly. He is a recipient of the Misumi Award from AASP and a Knight Fellowship from the Center for Informed Democracy and Social Cybersecurity. And yeah, I will just post the link of we in resistance psychology meetings, we use something called a Jamboard, where we put down our opinions or suggestions or anything for the researchers. Like you could put down your questions and something like that. And Joshua would be the discussant and would highlight Iram's work with relation to other forms of, with his work on digital resistance and how it connects to literature. And Iram will be presenting on digital resistance by Dalits, exploring creative forms of online resistance among marginalized community in India. And this work, I think, should set precedents for the elections that happen. So, Iram, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arita, for introducing us. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in to this session. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this platform to present my work. Also, thanks to Joshua for kindly agreeing to be my discussant here. One thing I would like to clarify that the title of my presentation is a bit different from what was there in the advertisement. It is Digital Resistance by Dalits, exploring creative forms of online resistance and marginalized community in India. So my work looks at resistance shown by Dalits, which is a severely marginalized population in India in a digital sphere. Now to start with, I shall give a little background to my research. As we all know, the modern world has become more technology driven with advancements in technology shaping the way we feel, think, and behave in digital spaces. Even though, despite these technological advancements, we can still see issues like inequality, injustice, discrimination, and prejudice. These issues which are very much prevalent in the modern world. In this world where so much of our lives happen online, marginalized groups are trying to create a space for themselves, as seen through globalized movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, and LGBTQ rights having a strong presence on social media platforms. It's clear that social media has become an important outlet for marginalized people to express their resistance. So now, what is resistance? Resistance is broadly understood as a process and act of challenging one's subordinated position in a given social system, as suggested by Haslam and Reichel. It is about, sorry. Okay. It is about challenging the oppressor's goal. It is about showing opposition, and this opposition can happen on different levels. It is important to understand resistance as existing on a continuum where at one end there is acquiescence, where the marginalized people who are subjugated, they have accepted their status and they are not taking any action to resist it. At another end, we have collective action where people engage in collective behaviors such as mass mobilization, protests, and demonstrations to challenge the status quo. Now, this extreme right end of the continuum has received the greatest attention of the social psychological researchers. But what is equally important, but also understudied at the same time, are smaller acts of everyday resistances that fall along the continuum, but far from either extremes. Everyday resistance is people engaging in their daily lives in actions that can undermine oppressors' goals, that can undermine power relations. It could be as subtle as saying no to an authority, failing to oblige to the social norms, or even talking back to unjust power relations. Uh, though these acts are subtle in nature, they may be covert in nature, but they are significant in their own sense because they are, though they are not directly trying to alter the power structures, but they are in a way showing the resistance these groups are having. These everyday kinds of resistances, it is uh, particularly important to examine them in groups that are historically and structurally marginalized and those who are residing in repressive contexts, because in these groups, directly challenging the power relations or power structures may be extremely difficult, uh, challenging, or at times could be threatening. So by engaging in these subtle, more individualized form of resistance strategies, they are still able to uh, challenge the oppressor's goals. They are still able to challenge the power structures. And these smaller acts of individualized kind of resistances are important in a way to keep the spirit of resistance alive and can lay the groundwork for larger social movements, for social change down the line. Now, this research looks at examining these processes of everyday resistance in one of the historically marginalized groups in India, which is Dalits. This is to give you a little background about Dalits in India. So, the dominant religion which is there in India, that is Hinduism, it follows an age-old hierarchical system and it divides the Hindu society into different groups which are known as Varnas. Within these Varnas, there are smaller endogamous groups which are known as Jatis that are divided on the basis of occupation. What is important to note is that there is a graded privilege accorded to these different groups, such that the groups that are at the top enjoy the most privileges in terms of power, resources, and everything, and the groups that are at the bottom, as one goes down the hierarchy, this power and privilege diminish. At the top, we have Brahmins that are given priestly tasks that are mostly in academics and doing these kinds of, uh, like holding these kinds of jobs. Next, we have Kshatriyas, which are also known as warriors, who are mostly in administrative kind of duties and who have been the rulers in the past. Then we have traders, or we can call them Vaishyas, who are involved in the jobs of trading. Then we have Shudras at the bottom, people who are known as laborers, who are usually servants or do the serving kind of job. Outside this uh, pyramid, this social pyramid, there is a group erstwhile called untouchables, but now they're called Dalits, and they are relegated to the jobs which were regarded impure, such as manual scavenging, dealing with skin carcasses. So these were the tasks that were regarded impure that also led to the practices of untouchability and a lot of discrimination against them. So even though today we have a lot of affirmative actions in place for Dalits, but still we see a lot of discrimination, a lot of violence against them that is still there in India. And because of all that, they are usually they face lack of access to educational and technological resources. They face poverty, and there's a kind of a systemic oppression which is there that they're trying to deal with. So amidst this context, this research looks at how Dalits make sense of resistance on social media platforms, how they are making sense of their own resistance, and how is it actually manifested on digital media platforms. The corpus of the research consists of interviews that were done with 20 Dalit activists, and also the social media profiles or accounts of prominent Dalit uh, individuals. Now, this research is something which is still ongoing, but we have identified certain resistance strategies as reported by these Dalit activists, as well as what we see on social media. And what we have observed is that the resistance shown by Dalit individuals in a digital context, it varies on a continuum from being less confrontational to more confrontational. We'll discuss these strategies one by one. First is the least confrontational form of resistance, which is resistance in existence, where the mere existence of Dalits in an online sphere is seen as resistance. For example, if you look at this extract, it reads as me existing in these spaces is in itself revolutionary, because one of the biggest challenges of any marginalized community is to be not regarded as humans, to questioning one's existence. The mere existence of all of these in itself is resistance, that is being politically active online. So every moment of me being there, that is in digital spaces, means something. Here we see the participant regards the existence of their identity in an online sphere as a revolutionary act in itself, since the environment is non-conducive to the presence of Dalit. It is something which might seem very trivial, but it is significant in its own sense, since they're trying to create a space for them in a society that does not even acknowledge their existence, which disregards their humanity, which disregards their human dignity. Thriving in such an intimidating environment, thriving in such intimidating space is challenging, and it requires courage. So it is something which is perceived as resistance by themselves. It is also beyond the dichotomy of overt or covert, since they're neither trying to manifest their identity nor they're trying to hide it. They're just simply being there. This appraisal of resistance in existence itself is significant. Now, an extension of idea of mere existence is existing peacefully. For example, if you look at this extract, the anger of the Dalits gets a stage. Everyone is interested in seeing the anger of the Dalit. A normal, happy Dalit being an expert in any subject does not matter. As if without his anger, the Dalit is incomplete. An angry Dalit says, and many times unconsciously, one plays to the gallery. One is perpetually angry. In such times, simply existing joyfully within oneself becomes an act of protest. What sells is the anger of the Dalit. Only poetry or stories of the Dalits do not sell. This is a digital data excerpt where the participant is talking about how Dalit anger is often perceived as integral to the Dalit identity, and a sense of incompleteness is attributed to a happy or content Dalit. The participant emphasizes joyful existence within oneself as an act of protest against societal expectations and stereotypes, challenging the commodification of anger. It is about not giving into the expectations of the outgroup and not letting them define who you are by contesting the very imposed victimhood. It shows Dalits' agency in defining their own identity, in defining their selfhood beyond narrow portrayals of uh, their anger and victimhood, which also leads us to a related concept, which is psychological resistance here. Psychological resistance is the way disadvantaged people assert and insist on their own view of themselves instead of uh, believing and accepting the things dominant outgroups have to say about them. And it is through psychological resistance that marginalized individuals find a psychological strength by, by determining for themselves the meaning of their very existence. rather than accepting the meanings that the outgroups given by the powerful outgroups. For example, if you see at the if you see at this extract, especially the bold fonts, here the participant is talking about the privileged caste dominated social media outlets where they only want to show us as broken victims, never highlighting our triumphs and successes. This is how our history has been erased. Time and time again, we do not simply want to highlight our struggles and pain. We want the world to see our beauty, resilience, and successes as well. It is not enough for media outlets to simply cover stories of oppression and violence against marginalized communities. Uh, Through this extract, the participant wants to say that when privileged caste dominated media outlets cover stories of marginalized or disadvantaged communities like Dalits, they often do so in a manner that often portray them just helpless victims suffering from oppression and violence. However, the person in this extract is resisting that negative portrayal. They are saying that the Dalit community does not want to be merely shown as broken victims. They also want their triumphs, successes, beauty, and uh, resilience to also be shown and highlighted. By insisting that their full nature of existence and humanity be shown, they are and not just their struggles and weaknesses, but also their achievements and strengths. They are kind of trying to psychologically resisting the dominant narrative that tries to reduce their being, that tries to reduce them to just victims. They are asserting their own view of their self identity. Another less confrontational form of resistance is preserving collective memory, which is something which is very much prevalent on social media platform. Here we see that as part of preserving their culture and memory and like as collective memory, Dalits commemorate the birth and death anniversaries of prominent Dalit figures. They spread awareness about it by writing about it. They remember the contribution of prominent Dalit figures, also write about it, create awareness about it, and also commemorating a lot of significant events in the Dalit history. For example, the Battle of Koregaon, where it was seen as the a triumph of Dalits over against oppression by the privileged caste. Also, mass conversion to Buddhism. There are a lot of significant events in the Dalit history that they try to remember every year. They try to write about it and spread awareness about it. It has certain implications as well because it fosters a sense of collective identity, a sense of belongingness among Dalit community, a sense of collective pride and solidarity that can further mobilize support for engaging in larger collective action for social change down the line. Another less like now moving further on the continuum, we have some creative and increasingly confrontational strategies, yet still on a subtle level, which is the use of creativity in the form of humor, sarcasm, poetry, and art, which could be manifested through memes, parody accounts, satirical hashtags. For example, if you look at this extract, here, this excerpt is about a young Dalit activist being detained. And very sarcastically, his crime is explained as raising voice against injustice, reading, understanding things, and advocating for the rights of the marginalized. So it is done in a way so that while you are able to challenge the power dynamics, at the same time, you're able to circumvent the issues of uh, repression, or you're able to get away from being penalized or criminalized in a context which is trying to suppress your voice. Now, rather more confrontational way of showing resistance is asserting your identity, asserting Dalit identity on social media platforms. In the words of one of the participants, Even when I assert myself online, I am transgressing those caste boundaries which do not expect me to speak or claim a space. The excerpt highlights the cognizance of the participant in using identity assertion as a way to transgress the restrictions that have been put on them due to their caste identity, which limits their freedom of expression or restricts them from claiming a space. There are various ways through which identity assertion is done on social media platforms. By expressing one's thoughts and opinions, by expressing pride in one's identity, by documenting and showing Dalit culture online, by wishing and celebrating Dalit festivals, by sharing quotes of Dalit leaders, and most importantly, use of profiles, bios, or hashtags that have elements of one's identity. For example, if you see here, there are a lot of hashtags that are very much prevalent on social media regarding um, the Dalit identity, which is Dalit Lives Matter, Dalit History, Dalit Pride, Dalit Resistance. A lot of such hashtags are there that are used to assert their identity. Next, we have some digital excerpt. It is a caption with one of the pictures where the participant has posted a picture of a Buddhist wedding, where the participant is comparing the simplicity of Buddhist wedding with the Brahminical wedding. Uh, Brahminical wedding actually has a lot of rituals and traditions. However, the participant here is asserting their culture by beautifying the simplicity of a Buddhist wedding. And that does not follow a lot of rituals and traditions. Still, a lot of commitment is there. Why Buddhist? Because a lot of Dalits in India have converted into Buddhism. So they are trying to assert their culture, their cultural traditions and rituals. In this second extract, the participant is inviting other people to celebrate Ambedkar Jayanti with them, while other people are wishing them a Hindu dominant festival, which is Gudi Padwa. So, in this way, they are trying to assert the importance, the significance of their own festivals, their own celebrations, their own culture and social media platforms, and not just merely accepting the wishes that they are getting from the dominant outgroups. So they are trying to assert their identity in a way to let people know the existence, the significance of their culture. Now it is increasing, like it's more confrontational form for resistance where Dalit individuals raise voice against injustice on social media platforms. It is directly highlighting the injustices against Dalits, highlighting the caste humiliation they go through, the caste discrimination, which is still very much prevalent in the society, and a lot of incidences of caste violence that still happen in India. So they are reporting those stories, and it is also something which is not given due attention by the mainstream media. So they are now highlighting those injustices and expressing their dissent about it. They are also highlighting these because because of social media affordances, it has become very easier to it's easier when you provide evidences of uh, caste discrimination and practices of casteism. So social media makes you do that very conveniently. For example, here in this picture, the participant is highlighting the social boycott of Dalit children who are not allowed to eat with other children in the school, which is a testimony to the prevalence of casteism, the untouchability practices, even today in India. And they are also highlighting it by comparing it with the plight of uh, Brahmin people, by raising the question that the Brahmins don't have don't happen to have such experiences in Indian society. It is just the children of uh, the marginalized that face these kinds of social boycotts. And a similar kind of comparative disadvantage is shown in the second picture, which is the picture where deities are being worshipped in a temple. In the first part, a railway minister is allowed inside the temple premises because of his higher caste. However, in the second picture, the president of the state, even even after uh, securing the highest rank in the government hierarchy, she is not allowed in the temple premises just because of her lower caste. This is also a kind of comparative disadvantage, which is shown here. And through these pictures, by visualizing things, by writing about it, Dalit activists are able to uh, garner more, it also has certain implications. It does not only delegitimize the practices of the privileged caste groups, it also brings into attention the failure of the state to intervene rightfully, and it showcases the institutionalized nature of oppression, which helps in garnering more social support. Now, this is something which is the most confrontational resistance strategy when you're directly challenging the opposition. Uh, First, on social media, Dalit activists are setting up counter narratives to the dominant societal viewpoints that have subjugated them for and that have justified their discrimination and marginalization over the centuries. With this, they are diversifying the public discourses around caste, and they are also able to present and bring in different perspectives on caste issues. They are directly challenging the political leaders and authorities when they do or say things which reinforce caste-based prejudices and injustices. They're also challenging the humiliation and indignities that have been imposed on them by highlighting their struggle and humanity. They're challenging the very outgroup ideology and belief system that are used to construct them as inferior. And ultimately, they are challenging the very hegemonic power structures built on institutionalized casteism that have subjugated their communities from centuries. And this is done in a number of ways. For example, I have added a few digital excerpts to better uh, showcase how this direct calling out to the outgroup is done. First, look at this. This digital excerpt says, I will dare say this, most of the problems India faces today and finds itself in are because of Brahminical hegemonic thought. It's just the cold, hard truth. The statement suggests that the speaker challenges the traditional Hindu caste system for bearing a pervasive negative influence on Indian society, shaping its values, norms, and power structures in a way that has perpetuated various problems or challenges, say patriarchy or untouchability. And by calling it a cold and hard truth, the speaker is asserting that this problem is the situation is uncomfortable, but at the same time, unavoidable reality that needs to be acknowledged and confronted. In the second excerpt, which says, we aren't out to snatch dinner from anyone's families, but yes, we will not tolerate your hegemony anymore. The statement is in response to the common perception that reservations or affirmative action policies for historically marginalized groups like Dalits are taking opportunities away from other groups. However, while acknowledging that Dalits will not unjustly deprive others, they will no longer accept and tolerate this hegemonic system that has subjugated them for so long. This is a direct calling out to the outgroups, to the unjust power relations, and an open provocation to the hegemonic structures. Lastly, in this extract, the participant is directly challenging the dominant narrative, which says that uh, that there is no description of caste system in ancient Hindu texts. And he's doing so by providing a fact check and also referring to a source that defy this dominant narrative. So overall, challenging dominant narratives help them develop counter narratives and help them establish their own meaning making practices and develop a sense of agency in them. Uh, though the analysis is ongoing and we have a lot, we might get a lot to discuss further, but few points can be made at this point. Firstly, we can say that digital world like social media and the internet provides more chances for people to express their daily acts of resistance against oppression. Um, it gives you a platform to express everyday resistance in creative ways that can undermine power, that can undermine the unjust power relations, and uh, weaken the system that is oppressing them. It also helps in it also helps people to control and get around with issues of the state trying to repress and silence them. It allows a relatively safer space to, express your resistance without as much fear, though it has its own complications, which is a matter of debate. But still, it has given them a handy tool where to express these everyday kinds of resistance. Now, we need more discussion on question of these broader socio-structural factors. For example, the presence of suppression, the presence of institutionalized oppression, how these factors affect the adoption of different resistance strategies. It is also similar to what Hassan Asli in one of the earlier presentations of this series also suggested that there is a need to examine the interplay of broader socio-structural factors and individual factors in determining people's response to domination. But what I would also like to suggest is that the perception of context is also very important. It's important to see how the context, how these broader socio-structural factors are perceived by the individuals and how they affect individual motivations in encouraging these individuals to engage in different resistance strategies. It may be the case that the more you perceive the context to be repressive, the more you are resorting to the non-confrontational kind of strategies. But again, the subjective interpretation is also important. How like, for example, Ayanin and Toshdal in their study also talked about risk perception. It's just not the risk perception, but the subjective importance attached to the risk that determines how uh, you engage in collective action. So here also, there's a need to discuss more how the not just the presence of these broader culture, socio-political factors, but also how they are perceived by the individuals. They affect, they impact the adoption of different resistance strategies. Lastly, I would like to thank the participants, the data activists, for their invaluable participation and dedicated time to the research. I would also like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Yashpal Jogdan, for their exceptional guidance, unwavering support, and invaluable insights, which have been instrumental in shaping this work. And I would just like to say that this is an ongoing work and a lot of it has to be done. I look forward to the discussion. And if you have any questions, you can direct it to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Iram. And this was a very interesting, and I have gotten messages saying that it's a very good work. I will let Joshua first comment on and add to the discussion as a discussant, and then we will move to the discussion and suggestions if there are any. Okay. And thank you for, yeah, that was a very nice presentation. So, Joshua, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Aritra, and thanks, Iram, for really such a rich and thoughtful presentation. I really appreciated the work that you shared with us today, especially knowing how these kinds of projects, they feel very timely and important, given the internet, like as you mentioned, the internet's ubiquity in politics, but also really in social life more broadly. And yet so much of the literature, particularly in the social sciences, but also in the computational sciences, where these platforms are kind of seen as at home. So much still does not tackle the specific experiences of the broader global majority, right? And so I think I see your research as really valuable in enriching that discussion in the scholarship in this area, particularly not just because we're focusing on an area of the world, right, that is so geographically major and yet understudied, but also within that already globally marginalized region, you could say doubly marginalized people, the minoritized Dalit group, right? So I actually have some comments to kind of bridge, or I thought would bridge the research that you presented, your insights with the other literature in this area. I also have some questions that I tack on to this discussion. So feel free to just take whichever questions appeal to you the most, or whichever ones you see as most pertinent to your own work. And then I suppose I can give it back to the rest of the floor. So the first set of points that I wanted to comment on is in the introduction to the research. We posit that the internet has revolutionized, right, the landscape of activism, of resistance, and you talked us through this spectrum of digital resistance strategies. And so I certainly see this as such a well-grounded contribution to this growing literature. But as you know, this field has also undergone really complex developments, especially over the last decade, which have troubled our earlier assumptions about what the internet can or cannot do relative to the broader social and political sphere. So some scholars, for example, have posited a dualistic view of the online and offline worlds, saying that what happens in one doesn't really matter in the other, right? And it goes both ways. In other scholarship, we've seen the online world positioned as a mirror or a reflection of offline behavior. So whatever people say online is just an extension of what they already believe and feel offline. And finally, we see more refractive views of the internet, right? Saying that what online can actually reshape what's offline. So it's not just about, online is not just an extension of existing things in the offline world, but the online activity can also change the offline world. So there are three seemingly separate, but potentially also complementary views of this relationship. But this kind of these sorts of assumptions are not just descriptive; they can also be normative. So, for example, it's urgent, depending on which set of assumptions you subscribe to, for these questions to intersect with politics, and in your case, also survival and dignity. So, for example, some people who believe that the online activity is not actually that valuable, that's where concepts such as slacktivism come in, right? Where online forms of resistance are not just without value, but can even detract from pursuing, what is perceived to be the quote unquote true resistance offline. But I think one of the really interesting things that your study does is it exposes and ultimately counters some of the underlying assumptions between some of these positions. So online and offline distinctions still definitely matter, but as your findings show, your participants declare that their mere existence on online platforms, their ability to claim a place in the digital realm, is also a claiming of place and space within society. Or as one participant says, simply existing joyfully is in itself an agentic act of dignity and resistance that doesn't have to be measured up to some offline counterpart, right? So that, I think, was really valuable, a really valuable point. And so on that note, I was wondering, if you could also comment on whether you've grappled with these ontological assumptions as well, and is there anything specific to the Dalit situation that situates them in a distinct way relative to these debates? Do you think that, you know, the online strategies of resistance produce offline effects? And to what extent does it even matter? So that's the first set of points that I wanted to share. The next is, I guess, more specific to our contribution to the digital resistance volume, where our approach was to draw upon socio-ecological perspectives. So just as an introduction, I think when we talk about digital life or digital behavior, we almost don't we almost don't mention that what we're imagining is maybe people on their phones or computers, right? Individuals. But what we tried to argue is that digital resistance and also digital activities in general need to be seen relative to micro level individual activity, which is nested within the meso level of group and collective activity, which is also in turn situated within macro contexts of state configurations of power, or especially in your research, the Hindu caste system, so things like that. And when so concretely, what that would mean, right, is if you have individuals online, they may be part of these groups that will kind of shape the way that they exist online, the way that they behave online, and at the same time, how the group's position within the broader culture can also introduce constraints and limits and all of that. So one of the key points that we make in our chapter is to see those dynamics, those multi-layered dynamics, as happening on both the side of the resistor as well as the side of the oppressor, right? And these dynamics operate at the same time and in opposition. So in particular, when we look at the digital resistance literature, I think there's been so much more optimism, right, about what social media can do, especially with the early 2010s, with the Occupy movement, Arab Spring. But especially in recent years, we've also seen how states and hostile powers have also become very adept at using these democratized technologies with creativity, with volume, with velocity, and when they're the oppressors in power, they even have more resources to organize and sustain their influence, right? But at the same time, that still doesn't preclude, as your research shows, how activists can also and even non-activists can enact digital resistance that creatively defy that asymmetrical relationship. So social media features are uniform across accounts, meaning both the state and individuals will be using the same platform. But individuals can still engage in these everyday innovations that can extend, subvert, and ultimately repurpose what is possible within the digital realm, right? So and I think what you showed us really with your work is how that's possible even for historically entrenched marginalized groups, right? So I suppose with these ideas in mind, I was wondering if you could also expand a little bit on these disentangled categories. So on the Dalit side, to what extent do you see their practices of resistance in relation to primarily individual pride and agency versus more collective empowerment? And maybe also to consider, or if you have considered, how do oppressive forces like the state or the dominant castes in turn respond to these resistance strategies, right? So it goes both ways. And I also wanted to add that, in addition to the very rich insight about existence as resistance, it's also how I understood your work was also visibility as resistance, which highlights the relational nature of what they're doing. So they're not only existing with dignity online, they also become visible and they make visible their struggle alongside the richness of their lives beyond just struggling, right? So they're unique individuals, they're a rich community with a history and an identity. So while you've focused, for example, on prominent Dalit figures, to what extent do you also see their visibility as perhaps further bolstering community? So if there's another Dalit individual who's seeing, oh look, there's there's prominent figures in my group that are saying these things, that are acting in overt or covert resistance to the oppression. What does that do for other members of the community? And again, going back to the point about the oppressors, just as mere presence and claiming of space can be an act of agency, would the silence or non-engagement by dominant groups perhaps also constitute a reassertion of hegemonic power? So do you see the criticisms that are being laid out against the dominant groups, are they being responded to? Does it shift how the oppressor also positions themselves? So these are some of the things I wanted to add to the discussion, trying to be mindful of my time. And so yeah, I also asked a few questions, and like I said, feel free to take whichever points are most are most appealing to you. So that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joshua. I will ask you to respond.
Yeah, should I respond?
Yeah.
Thank you, Joshua, for engaging with my work so beautifully, and for giving me these questions to reflect upon. First of all, your point on this online offline debate, there's a great deal of debate around these issues, whether online activism is a kind of slacktivism that distracts individuals from engaging in offline actions, or does it facilitate offline action, or are they complementary to each other? Are they existing in two different worlds? Yeah, there are a lot of debate around all these issues, but I actually did not engage with these questions while I began my work, because it was primarily to examine Dalit's perspective of using online sphere as a place of resistance, and it's primarily an exploratory study. So we also wanted to explore how do they make sense of this digital world, and we did not start with an assumption whether it is going to like facilitate offline mobilization or not. We were just starting our exploration. So here, what I would also like to emphasize is that the context, the population you are studying is also very important. Whenever we talk about these online offline debates, we are mostly doing it in a westernized world, right, where people already have a lot of resources, technological resources, where the to put it in this terminology, we are researching these concepts in a weird world, Western, educated, industrialized, rich and democratic. They've always had those resources. And when we talk about these things, we often take the presence of these resources as like taken for granted, but they are not omnipresent, right? Here, the advent of technology in itself is something that has given Dalits a voice. It is not something that have always been there, or when we talk about Dalits, especially, they've always been devoid of even the basic resources like food, shelter, and healthcare. So having technology in place, it has certainly given them a handy tool to voice their opinions, to at least express their resistance. And it is, I won't call it uh, slacktivism. Why? Because if you're giving if you're giving mic to a victim that has a, a, a victim who has not been able to raise his or her voice earlier, you are empowering them in a way. So even if they're not uh, even if these efforts are not being translated into the offline mobilization, they are still able to make some noise. And ultimately, what this also relates to your second question, we are talking about how the distinction between this individualized course of action and how it relates to the collective action. If we talk about collective action from a social psychological perspective, it is more about the intention of engaging in. If you even a single person is engaging in an action with an intent of uh, advancing collective concerns, or with the intent of benefiting the group of which he or she is a part of, they are engaging in collective action, right? So when Dalits are using digital media to express their resistance, even when they're doing it in an individualized way, it has certain implications at collective level. How social media is helping them to strengthen their social identity, which is a well-known predictor of collective action, right? So it gives them a space where they find sense of belongingness. It gives them a space where they can talk about their collective grievances. It gives them a space where they can openly share their um, values, their perspectives, and everything. So it not only strengthens their social identity, but also gives them a kind of psychological empowerment, which is very much important to engage in collective action further. So I think moving beyond this online offline debate, whether it is it's also something which was outside the scope of my present research. So I was not making claims about whether it is uh, making an actual impact or not. I was more interested in studying these processes on a psychological level, how and why they are engaging in it, and what implications does it have for them. And what we have found out is certainly it certainly have a lot of psychological implications for them. And these psychological implications are, in a way, very much important when we talk about engaging in collective action further. Because when you are engaging in an online sphere, you're also garnering social support. You're also making solidarity networks around the globe, and this in turn helps them at least create a space for them in a society that has suppressed them from centuries. So, and every step is a beginning. So even if you're able to secure that space, even if you're able to make some noise, it certainly have implications further. We might not see it right now because social change is a very slow process and very slow and steady process, but it certainly help them develop the psychological strength, the psychological empowerment to deal with the situation, and basically it strengthens the predictors, the basic motivations for engaging in collective action. It's very much important. When you we have one study also by Wilkins et al. That have found out that when you engage in online actions, it further enables offline action by creating a sense of uh, psychological empowerment, psychological strength in individuals. So this is what I have to say right now about the impact of it and the significance of it. And no matter how small an action is, no matter how uh, trivial that it actually certainly have a lot of implications for social change. I hope it answers some of your questions.
No, yeah. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Iram. Due to very less time, I would engage with 3 or 4 questions from the Jamboard. If you have any suggestions, please put it down, or questions for Iram that would engage her work better. So first question is very interesting findings. What method of analysis has been used? Is the aim to understand typology or is the aim to understand typology of different forms of resistance amongst the population. So yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we have been using uh, a reflexive. We are kind of developing the major themes as resistance strategy, and we are using reflexive thematic analysis for that. And another strand of work, because it is a larger project, this was just one part of my work. And we are not actually aiming at building typology of resistance strategies. This is because this is an ongoing work. We have identified some of them, and it's a very early stage to make claims what we will be ending up with. So yeah, that's what I have to say for now. And then certainly not a typology, but yeah, of course, we'll uh, think about it. How do we want to write it down? How do we want to analyze it? What do we want to discuss more? So yeah, that's a very early stage to make any harder claims about the report.
Another question is what conceptual boundary or distinction is there between psychological resistance and peaceful existence? Yeah. And another related question is how, when you said resistance beyond the overt spectrum, what do you mean by that?
Okay, first I'll be responding to the last question, which is about when I'm saying covert or overt resistance. What do I mean by that? Covert resistance is when these are the resistance strategies when we are not uh, when we're trying not to manifest our identity in a way, and these are very much, uh, covert in nature, that are very hidden in nature. People may not uh, understand it as a resistance strategy, but you might be showing resistance. And overt resistance, when you're out there, you are confronting the out groups, and you're doing something that is being acknowledged and recognized by other as a resistance. When I talk about existing, just simply existing as a resistance and beyond the boundary of overt or covert, what do I mean to say is that um, when a Dalit individual uh, is existing in an online context, he is there. He is not trying to manifest his or her identity by by doing identity assertion, by documenting their culture, or by expressing their thoughts and opinions related to their identity. They are not doing that, so it's not overt in nature. Secondly, they are also not hiding from the out groups, or say the audience. They're not hiding their identity at the same time. They are not doing things uh, that may not uh, so basically they're not doing anything uh, which which can which involves hiding their identity either. So they are not doing the manifestation thing, and they are not doing the hiding kind of thing. They are just being simply there. So it is beyond that. It does not matter whether they are expressing their identity or not. It does not matter uh, that they're hiding their identity or not. They are there, and the presence of them in a space which does not, acknowledge their existence is itself a resistance, and it is a resistance for them. So it's not like what is the point here is that it does not matter whether you recognize it as a resistance or not, but the people who are engaging in that kind of thing, they themselves are recognizing it as resistance, because they are in the space uh, which do not want them to be there, right? This was in response to the overt and covert kind of uh, the distinction between overt and covert. And second, the conceptual the distinction between peacefully existing and psychological resistance. I would say that peacefully existing is itself an extension of this concept only. It is the understanding of the psychological resistance only. Psychological resistance is a broad thing. It is when you psychologically contest the meaning given to your identity by the outgroup. You do not want to give into their definition of who you are. You do not just passively want to accept it. You want to defy the power structures. You want to uh, give your own. You want to assert your own uh, understanding of your selfhood. So when the person is talking about peacefully existing as a form of resistance, it's also a kind of psychological resistance only. It is just that because I have not yet categorized, or I have not made the typologies yet, so I just put it in a in continuation. It is not as distinct because I put it on different slides. It may seem like it is, but it is a part of psychological resistance only. So in any manner, when you're trying to contest the meaning given to you by the outgroups, and when you're trying to develop your construct your own narratives of who you are engaging in psychological resistance because you are determining for themselves what that identity means to you. So that is what I have to say about psychological resistance here.
Yeah. We are over time, but I'll take one question because it's very important. That is, what is your take in what your take on intersectionality when it comes to the Dalit identity? For instance, the social media presence of Dalit women, Dalits who are not Buddhist, etc.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. So yeah, last question and I will end it.
Yeah. So what is my take on it? So very certainly, uh, the intersection of identities, especially when you combine more than one marginalized identities, being a Dalit and being a woman, and it has different implications. It of course have a lot more challenges than simply being a Dalit, but our research has not uh, still looked at these intersectional challenges or intersectional experiences. But this is an interesting question we would like to dig further, and we would want to see how. But yeah, what I remember from my interviews, I have certainly uh, uh, seen participants saying that if you are a Dalit who comes from a privileged caste, say, there are a lot of questions involved when you become politically active online. There are a lot of people who challenge your position that you come from a privileged background. How can you even say this? That discriminate? Have you ever faced discrimination? You're you're having such like you're having this privilege. You are using these resources. You have this. You have that. How can you even say this? Intersectionality is not only about challenges for the marginalized, but also for those who have some resources and power, like privilege, who are up in the socio-economic ladder. So challenges are also there for them, of course, and for people who are doubly marginalized. For example, these Dalit women, they have a lot of challenges. They face a lot of uh, threats. They face a lot of abuse when they become politically active online. So these are the things that we have observed while interviewing our participants, but it was not our focus of here, so we did not elaborate on it. But yeah, I would like to dig more to this question further. Thank you.
Yeah, there is also intersectional humiliation that I have observed. Like it does not only retain to their Dalit identity, but also body shaming, color shaming, and all of that. Yeah. There are two questions by Fuad and Ali who are trying to find your understanding of peaceful exist, like the point about them just existing as resistance, and for that's that, so a kind of subjective resistance that is overt to the self, overt to the self and covert to others. And Ali adds, similar to this, is it a hybrid covert overt form or questioning the dichotomy itself? Ali, if you want to expand a little bit to provide context, that would be okay. But yeah. So yeah.
No, it was just adding to what Fawad mentioned, that it
Yeah,
should be
got it.
over to oneself, but covered to others. And
Yeah.
it seems like that both are present in the same one. So so that's why I was wondering whether that was what Iram mentioned, that is it a hybrid form, or is it like no, the whole dichotomy doesn't apply when we are talking about like existence as a form of resistance.
Oh, I really did not uh, think too much about the overt covert dichotomy. But yeah, so to say, if you're acknowledging something as a resistance, you're saying that it is overt for oneself and not for the people who are observing it, right?
Yeah, like the other group. Like it's a resistance in itself for being present, but covert for the oppressor caste like Brahmins.
Yeah, surely, yeah. Yes, it could be so. We can say this.
Cool. And although there might be many more questions, but we're already over time. And thank you so Iram for so gracefully presenting and taking all those questions. Further added the last few sessions that we have this session. And if you want to present anything for future session, Joshua, we would be hoping you do. You could definitely propose a session and we could, yeah, contact you with how we can organize it. Thank you, Fuad. If you want to add something, then that would be the end of this session. Otherwise,
Just want to say thank you very much for a really wonderful project and a presentation. And thank you also to Josh for a very thoughtful discussion.
yeah.
And I'm sorry, everybody else, that we didn't have more time for discussion this time. But if there's interest, I'm sure we can set up another session next time on the same topic, or maybe once you finish your project, you can come back and show us the full results and stuff like that. I'm sure we would be happy to have you all again back. So yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you everyone who
Thank you,
attended.
everyone.
And good night and good day to
Yes.
all in the global.